All right, we're recording, so take it away, Will, and your team.
Cool. Hi, welcome everybody. I am Will Baldwin. I'm a running coach, mainly through Sundog Running, which is like we're a collection of coaches, and we work in mostly the trail running space with some road runners as well. And yeah, we coach a lot of individual runners. We work with some races, and some years we've put on some training camps for people to come and run together. But yeah, we're stoked to be working with Pikes Peak. Love the race. Going to be there this year. And so, yeah, I'm working with a lot of athletes that are running the race. But today I was just going to go over like some basic training things, especially on a lot of the questions we had got. A lot of them were focused around like how to train. Most of the questions were altitude focused because Pikes gets a lot of people coming from people that don't live in Colorado or altitude. And yeah, just wanted to know about going about doing a race at high altitude and elevation. So I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me 1 second here.
Cool. We're seeing it.
Yep. Cool. We're live. All right. So I'm Coach Will Baldwin. I work with Sundog Running. I have my own website as well. It's runbaldwin.com. First question I saw the most, we're going to dive right into it. Going over altitude. Now, if you live in Colorado, it's not as big of a deal, but it is a very big mental burden for a lot of people, especially for a race like Pikes, because it's not even regular altitude. There's lots of races at 5,000 or 7,000 feet. This is a pretty unique challenge going from over 7 up to 14. First things first, altitude's hard for everyone. You can be born and raised in the Springs and do Pikes Peak, and it is still very difficult. There's no cheat code around it besides, a lot of exposure and fitness, but there's no quick hack to beat altitude. There are some good strategies though, and we're going to go over several of those. One that's been used a lot for people who don't live here and people who do is doing what we call exposures. Something like the bar trail race is a great example. It happens several weeks, over a month before Pikes. Very similar elevation gain and time at altitude. So if that is something that is available, it's very smart. For one, it's going to give us a mental relief of what that feels like before the day. So we're going to get to spend a lot of time high up and see what happens to our body as we're moving in that type of environment. We're going to get to practice some fueling and hydration strategies, which is a big part of how we experience altitude and altitude sickness. Yeah, and so a lot of that is mental. We're not going to get really robust altitude adaptations for something like that, coming out for a couple days and doing a race like bar, or going somewhere else that could, an altitude exposure could be anywhere. If you look at the study, some will say it takes a minimum of 14 days. But even that's just getting, some of the bare minimum of adaptation and comfortability with altitude. We're not going to get robust long-term gains from short stints like that. But we will get some, and mentally it will be a lot easier doing something like that. So whether it's bar trail or if there's anything else, there's tons of places with altitude in California, Utah, Arizona. And so if there's any type of trip before Pikes that you were already planning on taking, getting a hike or getting a trail run, up high and getting to experience that beforehand is really helpful. Again, kind of staying on the altitude sickness part, because a lot of the questions were, about like, I'm trying to prevent altitude sickness, or what do I do? We do know that alcohol plays a big part in altitude sickness. So being mindful of that coming into the race, the week leading up, especially the few days leading in, if you do drink, being mindful of that and having a strategy of how to go that. And then it sounds cliche, but hydration, and I'm sure Skratch will go over this as well, but not just water, but what's in our hydration and how we're going that same thing leading into the race, the 4 days going in and the day of, how well our hydration is, what we have mixed in our ability to absorb that's going to affect our how we're impacted by the altitude. Next one is effort. We have to drastically change our effort at altitude. Again, sounds so almost elementary, but paces just don't mean the same thing. And one of the biggest things we can do to avoid it is starting out really easy. Sometimes we get excited for that first road portion of the race. It's just an exciting environment, but going out too fast, a poor pacing strategy is going to make the altitude effects much worse. Last thing I want to go over, because I get this question and people try this all the time, is altitude mask, which we see very often. They're marketed a lot. People always ask, if I'm going to do this race at altitude, should I buy a mask? Should I be training with that? My answer would be no. We could get into the science, but they're pretty different in how they impact. Altitude is a change in percentage in the amount of oxygen in the air, where masks limit the total volume of air that can come and go. It's more like weightlifting for your lungs, which can be an effective workout. But when we wear a mask, for one, it's going to greatly reduce how long we can work out, because it's going to be pretty hard to breathe, which is something we really don't want going into a race like Pikes. Pikes Peak takes a long time to complete. It's a very long, arduous race. So when we're doing our workouts, we generally need to work out for long periods of time. And if we're wearing a mask, it's going to make it really hard to do that. And again, it's just not the same. It's not the same impact. It's not the same type of altitude. And so we're not technically training for that. So not something I would recommend.
We lost you, Will.
It was like right when you click the slide. No. Shoot. No, not yet. You're unmuted.
There we go. We got
Gotcha.
you back.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Yep. We got you.
Hold on one sec. Okay, you can hear me now?
Yep.
Sorry about that. That's my bad. Okay. Approaches altitude. People, next most common question, talk about when to show up for the race. Three strategies there. Most common one we see, and it's pretty effective, is kind of waiting to the last minute, like coming 1 to 2 days before. Why people might do this is because altitude does negatively impact some people if you come from sea level and you haven't had many exposures here before. So limiting that, not getting in a hole like for 3-4 days before, just kind of showing up, changing your effort, having a strategy of how to pace the race, and then going through it. People do that quite often. Next one is something like I talked about, like still coming 1 to 2 days before, but a month or two out, having an altitude exposure, like a little mini camp weekend, and going through that process beforehand and seeing what that feels like something like bar trail, which a lot of people do. Very helpful. The third one is coming out to the race quite a bit earlier, anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks, getting that minimum 14-day exposure. It's a little more expensive, but there are tons of benefits. You can go get on the course. You could do your last, 2 really big long runs on the course, see what that's like. You can get that minimum exposure where you're starting to adapt. There were some questions about how do I change my hydration and my fueling for different humidity and at altitudes. You can start to practice some of those things. A lot of, a lot of people can argue about which one of these strategies is best, but most of the time it just comes down to logistics. Not everyone can come out to the springs way earlier. Same for not everybody can go to do bar trail a month in advance. But they're all super helpful, and coming up with a plan, knowing your situation, can make a big difference. But there's none that are dire. Like if you don't come out for an exposure beforehand or don't come out 3 weeks early, it doesn't mean you're at a huge disadvantage or you won't be able to do the race. Quite the opposite. Most of the time we're completely fine. So now we're going to get into some specific training stuff. So some traits of success that I've seen that people have had good experiences in races like the Pikes Peak Marathon. Consistency is huge. Week to week, doing the best that we can. People that have been consistent and trained. And the second one, which we'll get into more with Skratch, is having an actual fueling plan that you've practiced and carried multiple times. There's so many parts to that. The plan part is something we've actually written down that we want to do. Not that we're going to perfectly execute, but I would like to be able to get about this many carbs per hour. I know, about at 30 minutes, I'm going to take this gel and so on. Having a general guideline of what we'd like to do. And then in at least, I prefer at least 4, but as many as we can long runs, practicing that plan while carrying what we're going to carry in the race. It's something sometimes people miss out on. There's some mandatory gear we have to take, but then we need to bring some hydration, a lot of gels, maybe some different food. And it can be quite different if you've never run with a bunch of stuff like that before, all the vests and belts. So going through that, and then, for the athletes I work with, we take notes on all of that, and then we tweak that plan every time that we execute it. So if our fueling was too much, too little, if we didn't like our pack, if trying to figure out what gear exactly we need to take, all those things. When people have done that a few times, the race is so much more mentally and physically comfortable and a fun experience when we're prepared in that way. So some other training for Flatlander stuff. I know it's called the Pikes Peak Marathon, but it shares very few similarities in time and pace with a road marathon. You can't really take in any of those numbers with us. If we think about how we would run on a flat road, it doesn't correlate well at all. And so we have to use that same effort, and we have to learn that correlating those efforts with our body, but we can't really use times and pace in the same way. Everybody desperately wants to. They want to say, what time do I need to be at this aid station? And it never, ever, ever works out that way. We can never really predict that. We're going to have big swings in our body, and so we have to be comfortable with letting go of some of those things. Next part, and this could be true of even people that live in Colorado, is incorporating some artificial inclines, as I like to call them. And the most common one is a stair machine or an incline treadmill, because a lot of us don't have giant hills to utilize where we live. So if you are a Flatlander, a big part is at least 1 to 3 times a week, converting some of those what would normally be runs or long runs workouts into something that's going to have quite a bit of incline. And we'll talk about some ways to do that. The other thing is, as runners and athletes, we constantly hear and talk about strength training, but we don't always know how or when to incorporate it. For races like this, it is even more beneficial. A lot of Pikes is like doing a single leg squat for 4 or 5 hours at a time. And so a lot of that single leg strength that we could develop in the weight room will even help us more than a flatter race in this situation. So if you've ever been curious about that, or you have a background with strength training, this might be the best time and situation to really lean into that and grow. Or if there's someone you've always wanted to work with in the strength training side, this could be a really good time to reach out to them and utilize their services. We just talked about artificial inclines. We got to think about vert if we are a Flatlander. There's almost 8,000 feet of vert, almost 600 feet of gain per mile. So, are there any ways we can replicate that in training? Is there a big local hill around where you live? Are there any trails that have any vert that we can utilize? Again, if we have to use the artificial, can we get on the treadmill and really crank that up? Same with the Stairmaster, but incorporating any vertical gain is going to make a huge difference because it is quite a different motion than just regular running. It's a lot more knee lift. It's a little more extra strain on our back, our Achilles, our calf. It's quite different. So having a plan of how we're going to incorporate that a few times a week. Sometimes I think people go one of two ways. They don't think about it enough, or they try to do vert every single day, which that can kind of wear us out as a stimulus as well. You think of any muscle, like if we did bicep curls every single day, that benefit and stimulus would kind of wear off. And so stuff like vert and strength, we need to incorporate, but we would like to have a balance, and so things like that are generally like every few days. Not to overdo that. I saw this was a great question, so I put a little quick couple things to think about, what to prioritize in training, because this is going to be quite different than other races. The first thing I put in, and man, it could be very easily to move these around, but first thing to think about is total training volume. And so I like to think of it as, the last 20 to 24 weeks going into the race, looking at our total training volume. Maybe you could compare it to last year, but just about every study, when we're looking at why people have a good experience or why people finish the race, the people that finished had a higher total training volume than the people that didn't. And that's just how many hours we spent running, doing strength training, on the stair machine, whatever that is, total amount of training we spent a week. And we just got to do the best we can. We all have lives. We're busy. And so it's just getting the most out of ourselves that we can. And, I'll put that note, 4 days a week's better than 2, 5's better than 3, 8 hours a week's better than 3. So, not every week's going to be perfect. Some are going to be bad. We're going to get sick. Things are going to happen. But just trying to increase the total of that whole block. What's prioritized? Fueling. You can't do this race without any fuel. It'll get very, very difficult, and that's how a lot of DNFs and search and rescues happen when people are underfueled. So you need a plan. This is a hyperlink to a little sheet where people can track their fueling. That'll be available for everyone afterwards. But it's just a very simple way to track what you are hoping to do. But like I talked about earlier, you need to have a plan. You need to have practice it. What to prioritize next, like we talked about, having some vert, some hill workouts, incline on the treadmill, having a plan of when and where we're going to get that, and what works for you where you live. Next one, I'm very biased, but some type of guidance or plan. Obviously, like you could work with someone like me, a coach. You could be following a plan from someone. There's a lot of great resources through Pikes. They have some really cool in-person stuff with Fleet Feet. It could just be a friend that's finished the race a few times that's guiding you. But having some feedback plan, someone to be bouncing ideas off. If you write out what you're hoping to do, like when you're hoping to do certain long runs, even just that process of having to think through it can be super helpful. So yeah, some type of guidance or plan. Next one, like what to prioritize, and it's a little bit lower, but still important. We don't all have as many mountains and hills, but we can all go do regular running workouts the same as we would do for any race. So general threshold speed work like we would do training for a marathon will still help us quite a bit in this race. We do need some specific verticality stuff, but being fit will help us in all aspects of a race like this. If the fitter we are, the better we'll experience altitude. The fitter we are, the better we'll experience the heat and humidity. So general road running fitness will have some benefit there. And so incorporating things like that, especially if we do live in a flat area. And then the next thing, last one I put to prioritize, is learning how to run slow and thinking about hiking. I think sometimes we think all about running, but there's a very high percentage that you will hike and walk in this race, probably like 99%. One thing that I really noticed with people, I did a group run last night, is that people coming to the trails often tend to run really hard all the time. Like we're going uphill and they run hard, then we start to walk. And then we walk real slow and we sit there and then we run hard again. But learning how to run uphill very at a low effort and not make it so hard, because the race is hard as it is. And so there's very few times where we can run fast per se like we would on the roads in this race. So learning how to run a little bit easier going uphill, and then when we do need to take those breaks, learning how to hike and practicing some hikes in training for a race like this. Here's a picture of a belt. Last thing I want to talk about is some ways to carry stuff, because I talked about having a fueling plan and practicing it. This is the belt I use for most trail races. There's two options. You can have a belt like this, or you can have a hydration vest, which we all know. Most people will probably end up using a vest. You can carry a little bit more stuff, but you need one of the two options. And we need to practice that again before race day, because running with a fully loaded vest is a little bit different. There's some extra weight. It's going to bounce. It's going to be different as we load it up. And so, we need to be thinking about that pretty far in advance, because if our vest or belt isn't working, we're not going to be able to practice with our new one. And so, today we need to be thinking about what would I like to use during the race, and then starting to do some runs with it fully loaded and packed down. So that's the main gist. We're gonna get into some specific questions that people have towards the end, but that's the.
Thanks, Will. I am going to pop in with 3 questions because they're pretty specific before we jump over to nutrition. So in the chat, the first one, can someone sub in some volume on a bike versus running? And what kind of bike workouts would be beneficial to that training?
Absolutely. Bikes are one of my favorite ways to kind of simulate some of the impacts of verticality and like a trail run, because it's very quad specific. So like when we're going uphill and downhill on the trails, it's very hard on our quads. We can definitely use a bike. I will say you're going to see a lot more benefits when it's a little more high intensity. So like there's not as much benefit from a lot of easy, slower spinning. There's some, but those specific trail adaptations will happen, in some of the bigger rings, as we call it on the bike. So yeah, absolutely. And I love cross training. So we definitely can, but I would try to work in some bigger intervals, or doing, if there's any hills in your area on the bike would be a great idea. Another really cool thing about bikes is many people can bike longer than they can run, just because of the lower impact. And so I've seen a lot of people use a long bike ride to fully practice their entire fueling strategy. Like, so say you're planning, say you're going to do the Ascent and you think it's going to take 4 hours. Well, you could theoretically do a 4-hour bike ride easier than a 4-hour run. And you could try that your full fueling strategy on that 4-hour bike ride, okay, at 1 hour, this is what I'm going to take, and make those notes. And so it's a cool thing to utilize the bike for as well.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to do one more question, then I'll let you browse the comments while Skratch goes. When is it too late to start training? What's that sweet spot of number of weeks, especially if you're coming back from injury, maybe right this moment?
That is such a hard question. I get it all the time. And the opposite I get too is like, well, when should I start? And it's like that old saying of like, when should you plant a tree? It's like the best time was 20 years ago. It's the same for this. It's like people like, I don't ever think of like training as like, okay, we're only going to train for 20 weeks, like
Yeah.
what you've been doing the last few years is going to help you in this. And so like, when's it too late? It really just depends on you as an athlete. Some people coming off an injury, it might not be as big of a challenge for them to get going again. So it's a hard question because it depends on your fitness level. I mean, and then obviously versus the Ascent versus the full, those are two very different. I love people to have 16 to 20 weeks, but it's way better when they've been, running before that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a tough one. Just depends on where you're at as an athlete and what you can do, and how bad the injury was and how long you were out for. So a little tougher one.
Great. Awesome. All right. Well, keep your questions coming. I know Anna, the other coach, has jumped on, so she'll be able to answer those later too. But we're going to jump over to Skratch Labs. Megan, the dietitian, she's going to give us some nutrition tips. So welcome, Megan.
Hello, everyone. Super excited to be here and chat about nutrition. That was an awesome talk, Will. I learned a lot just from hearing you for 20 minutes. So hopefully,
Thanks, Meg.
Yeah. Okay, let me share my screen. Can you guys see this? Good?
Yep.
Yes, looks great.
Gotcha.
Great. Well, today I'll just jump right in because we have a lot to cover in 20 minutes. We'll just talk about kind of day-to-day nutrition fueling strategies, and then we'll talk about race day specific nutrition and hydration. And then I'll also touch on some of those elevation questions, but Will did a nice job, so I won't have to do too much, but I'll hopefully leave some time for question and answer. And then like Jordan said, I'll be sharing all these slides, so don't feel like you have to type a bunch of notes or anything. Before we get too far into nutrition, I just like to show this slide that kind of goes over sports nutrition, the sports nutrition pyramid, because a lot of people like to jump to all these supplements. You guys get a million ads online for supplements, but really those aren't going to be very effective if you don't have a good baseline balanced diet at the bottom of the pyramid here. So we first focus on that, and then we can start talking about nutrition, sports nutrition specifics like certain fueling, timing, and what to eat during the race, and etc. And then lastly, we can maybe add some supplements in there. But just kind of keep this in mind when you're thinking about your nutrition plan. So to build off that pyramid and kind of build your baseline diet, I would first kind of introduce you to what our macronutrients are. I'm sure many of you have heard this, but carbohydrates are going to be your primary fuel source. Especially for running, you guys burn through a lot of carbs during your training sessions. So we only have a limited store of these carbs, and we store it as glycogen in the body, in our liver and our muscle. And once that's depleted, you're going to fatigue really quickly, and you're really not going to be able to sustain the work that you're doing. Protein is the next macronutrient, and this should not really be used for energy unless you're under fueling. So we want to prevent that. Protein's really going to be important for muscle building and repair. Right after a hard workout, a lift, or a run, you want to repair those muscles that you just worked. So that's going to be the main focus on protein. And then fat is going to be your second energy source. It's really used at rest or really low intensity, like walking day to day on like a flat surface. And it's not a great pre-workout fuel source or during workout because it digests very slowly, and it can cause a lot of GI distress if you have a ton of fat before or during your exercise. So if you're more of a visual person, I really like these athlete plate models that were actually created here at UCCS in Colorado Springs, which is where you guys are going to be running. So kind of cool. But for endurance athletes, I would recommend sticking to the moderate training in the middle or the hard training plates for all of your meals, especially during this time when you're training, because like I said, you're burning through a lot of carbs. And these two plates, as you can see, like your carbs are going to be at least 1/3 to half of your plate, and then which are your starches and grains, and then protein will be about 1/4 of your plate at all your meals, and the other 1/4 of your plate or 1/3 of your plate, depending on which one you're looking at, is going to be those fruits and vegetables for fiber and to get your vitamins and minerals in and everything. So these are just a really good visual you can use. And some really quick tips, I just encourage all my athletes to eat every 3 to 4 hours. I see so many athletes skip breakfast, and that's like a big thing I recommend avoiding. Always start your day with something, even if you can't eat a big meal, like a smoothie or a piece of fruit and some peanut butter, like a side of protein. Just getting in that habit is going to be like one really easy change you can kind of start right now. And then if you're only able to do like one snack a day, I think doing a bedtime snack is what I would prioritize, because again, when you sleep, that's when all your recovery is happening. And this bedtime snack should be high in protein. So a lot of my athletes will do Greek yogurt and fruit, or a protein smoothie again as another option. But just something to focus on. And then I always say, please avoid fasted workouts. I'm sure any of you guys who have done these long races, I know there's some first timers and some people have done it before, but if you work out for really long and you're fasted, you're just gonna feel very crappy. You're gonna put yourself at risk for injury, and we just want to prevent that. And like Will emphasized, really, like this is what we emphasize every day, is you need to practice your race day fueling. So even in your shorter workouts, like practice with different products and see what you can tolerate and how that works in your gut. So moving on to race day nutrition. This does not start the day of the race, as you've hopefully gathered by now. I like, as Will said, like kind of creating a template. This template here, you guys can kind of use if you want to build your own plan for race day. So starting off 2 to 3 days before races, I'm sure you've all heard of carb loading. So there's a lot of different protocols out there, but in general, like an easy strategy you can use is making all of your plates at least half containing carbs, or even up to 3/4 of your plates to be a carbohydrate containing food. And then the benefit of this is to top off your stored carbohydrates or your glycogen. And when you store glycogen, that binds a lot of water actually. So it's also going to help with hydration. So you're kind of getting more bang for your buck there. And then the night before your race, or even 2 to 3 days before, like Will said, we can pre-hydrate. We want to focus on that, especially at elevation, which we'll get into later, more about elevation, but really focus on adding salt to all your meals, having salty snacks. You can, I always tell my athletes, like, mix a bottle of hydration mix and put it by your nightstand the night before. So that way, in the morning, you can start sipping immediately on that hydration. And really, it just sets you up for more success if you prepare ahead of time. On the morning of the race, I know this one can be hard, but if you can get up early and eat a solid breakfast, something lower in fat, lower in fiber, because again, those are going to slow digestion down. That's really what we recommend. So an example, a lot of athletes will do like a bagel with a little bit of peanut butter and some honey, or oatmeal and some fruit, or a little bit of peanut butter in there as well. So that's more of a 2 to 3 hours before. And then again, keep sipping on those electrolytes all morning. And once you're kind of at that race line, I encourage you to do like a gel or some chews or fruit snacks or applesauce, something really quick digesting, a really simple carbohydrate that's just going to get you fuel to get you started in the race and kind of keep you ahead a little bit. And moving into the race, try to start fueling within the first hour. I have a lot of athletes who have waited to do this and are waited past the first hour to start fueling, and they oftentimes get fatigued very early on, and that can also result in a lot of GI distress if you don't fuel early enough. And then, sorry, I just saw the notification. And then once you finish that race, we just really, focusing on recovery. So recovery is, again, when you focus on protein and carbohydrates together. I know last year when I was at the expo at Pikes Peak, there was a ton of food available, and Skratch will be there. We'll have a booth, and last year we had our recovery drink mix available. So come visit us. I'd love to see you guys, since I know we're just talking on a computer right now, but come visit us. We'll have lots of samples, lots of fun, and happy to answer any questions after your race too. So now kind of moving on to hydration. I saw there was lots of hydration questions, especially around elevation. So hopefully we can answer some of those. But even like a 2% weight loss during your exercise, during your training, or during the race can result in poor performance due to dehydration. So when we think about sweat losses, it's not just water that you're losing. You're losing lots of different electrolytes, but primarily sodium is going to be the main electrolyte. You can see in this little picture here. And then, so that's the main one we're going to focus on, but you're losing small amounts of potassium, calcium, and magnesium, which those ones are more going to be what you're replacing during recovery. So when we think about sweat, we think about our sweat rate and our sweat sodium concentration. So your sweat rate is just how much sweat you're losing per hour. And you can figure this out at home by weighing yourself before and after your exercise, and you track your fluid intake during exercise. And there's a lot of online calculators that can kind of help you with this. You just plug in the numbers and it tells you, here's your sweat rate. But in general, I recommend consuming like at least half the amount of fluids that you're losing per hour in your bottles. So if you're losing like 1 liter or 33 ounces, try to get at least half of that per hour during the race. But again, this takes lots of practice, like you got to do some research on yourself and figure out what works for you. And then again, the sweat rate can change in different conditions, obviously. If it's hot out or cold out, if what you're wearing is, if it's windy out, it's going to change. So I would recommend testing it in a few different training environments and just kind of getting an idea of what your normal is. And then, as I mentioned before, the sweat sodium concentration is the second component of hydration. So this is a genetic number. It doesn't really change all that much. Like it can fluctuate very, very slightly, but you can figure this out by getting a sweat test, and usually they're around $100. So I mean, if you feel like you're struggling with hydration, this might be something that you might want to invest in and just get it done. At Skratch, we use precision hydration to test our athletes, which is also used in the clinical side. So it's kind of one of those gold standard mechanisms. But the precision hydration website has a link that you can use to put in your zip code and find where would be a good location for you to get a sweat test. But on average, like if you can't get a sweat test, I would guide you to just probably aim for 800 to 1,000 milligrams of sodium per 1 liter or 33 ounces of fluid that you're drinking. So it just depends on your bottle sizes, or if you're carrying a liter size bag, then that makes it, pretty easy. But that's just the average. So some people are going to be as low as 400 milligrams of sodium. Some are going to go up to 3,000 milligrams. So it really just depends. It's hard to pinpoint it without getting a test done. Just wanted to show a label of like what that might look like for you. So this is just this is our Skratch hydration, sport hydration mix. So you can see it has 400 milligrams of sodium in 1 scoop or in a single serve packet. Most electrolyte brands instructions are for 16 ounces bottles to mix it with. So if you do the math and you double that, it equals the average sweat loss of 800. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm happy to clarify. If it doesn't, just feel free to ask after the presentation. So to figure out, again, like your hydration needs, it's going to take practice, just like fueling does, just like your training does. So in general, day-to-day hydration, roughly half your body weight in ounces of water is what you should be drinking for fluids outside of exercise. You're going to need more. If you're sweating, right, you're going to need more than just that 75 ounces of fluid per day. So again, per hour, at least trying to get in half the amount of fluid lost in sweat. And then I would say most athletes can't really tolerate more than 1 liter or 33 ounces of fluids per hour, especially with running, because you guys are, kind of like bouncing up and down, and most people don't tolerate that in their gut very well if it's much more than 1 liter. I'm sure Jordan and Will can speak a little more on that since you guys have probably ran the race yourself. But the other bonus of knowing your sodium concentration is that you can drink to thirst. So if you have in your bottles, if you have what you're losing in your sweat, it's much more easy to just drink every time you feel thirsty instead of like feeling like you have to track every single ounce of fluid you're drinking. So, and then monitoring your fluid status. This is not a very scientific way of doing it, but it's free and kind of easy as a guide. When you look at your morning urine, like your first pee of the day, we want it to be light yellow if possible, like as you can see in this picture here. And then if it's dark, you are clearly dehydrated. So just sipping on fluids throughout the day is the best thing you can really do. I always discourage chugging fluids all at once because that's not really going to hydrate you. You're just going to pee it out. And you'll probably have very clear pee if you do that. So a lot of people will get those bottles, with like the little time markers on them for how much to drink. That can keep you on track. You can set little reminders on your phone if that's helpful. But yeah, hydration is very important for I would say it's just as important. You need to prioritize hydration and fueling together. Like if you don't do both, you're not going to be successful. And then heading into the lots of questions on elevation. Yeah, like Will said, this is a challenge for everyone, even people who live here. Like I've even felt altitude sickness and I live in the Springs. So there's some things you can do, some strategies you can do to prevent it or help it, but you never know how your day's going to end up. But in general, I will say fuel needs typically increase by about 10 to 30% compared to sea level. So just kind of thinking about like when you're doing your practice fueling, like maybe try doing more than you think you might need, just because when you're here at altitude, you're going to be burning more. You're going to be needing more fluids because you have more fluid losses through respiration. Also, people typically feel less hungry and less thirsty at altitude. So this is again when timers on your watch or your phone can be really helpful to remind you to eat and drink, because there's so much running through your mind while you're doing this race, I'm sure. So set reminders. Some people will prefer more liquid calories. Like we have our Skratch high carb drink mix. That one's super popular with people who struggle to actually eat during this race. But like Will said, you guys will be walking, hiking at a lot of points. So hopefully that makes it a little bit easier. But next, in general, altitude or not, we see a lot of questions about cramping and GI issues. So cramping can be multifactorial. If we think about stomach cramps and leg cramps, if it's a stomach cramp, it's usually due to kind of overdoing the fluid intake like we talked about before, or doing too much of one type of carbohydrate, or just overall too many like carbohydrates. They can crowd the gut a little bit. And then leg cramps can be due to many different things. Could be due to your shoes, your running gait, also your fueling pattern. Like I said earlier, if your glycogen's depleted in those working muscles, you probably will have cramping and not be able to continue going as efficiently. And then also training in different temperatures and environments can result in that cramping as well. So in general, it's really hard to narrow it down. So some things that you can do to help, like we've been talking about, is pre-hydrating really well. So that days before, not just the day of, or not just the day before, just maintaining a good hydration status can be helpful. And then if like it's inevitable that it's going to happen to some people, if you're on the course and you're having an active cramping session, sometimes people will do pickle juice. If you've heard of that before, that can be helpful, or something spicy. Like I've seen people do, if you like hot sauce. I don't think I could stomach it, but like those little hot sauce packets, that can be helpful on the race, or something sour to help with that cramp. And then maybe you guys have, I've heard this a lot. People will tell me like they'll eat a banana if they're cramping because of the potassium, but that's really not effective. So if you're cramping or feeling like you're bonking and having altitude sickness, that's when you really need to get a quick digesting carb in, like something liquid's going to be way faster to absorb into your bloodstream. Or like a gel would be fine too. Something really quick digesting. Next, I would say for anyone who has history of anemia or issues with iron absorption at altitude, I would just get if you have issues with that not out at sea level, like before you come to altitude, I would get your labs checked. You can ask your primary care doctor to order an iron panel like 6 weeks before, because if you're low, you definitely want to replace that because iron's really important for oxygen delivery to your working tissue. So that can help maybe prevent some of the altitude sickness as well if you're kind of on top of that. And then lastly, I know Will touched on this, but what to carry. I saw a lot of people last year wearing the running vests, and I personally like the running vests when I run. This one is just an example, but I think each bottle is around 16 ounces. So that can make it pretty easy to do the math on, how much sodium to put in each bottle and whatnot. And then for what else to carry, I would say, take some electrolytes with you. Skratch will have hydration on course. So if you use Skratch and you like it and tolerate it, that'll be convenient for you. But otherwise, if you have your favorite products, just taking the little single serve sticks with you so that you can throw them in your bottles and fill them up at each aid station whenever you need it. And then for other fuel, a lot of people like to do chews and gels like we've been talking about. The sour candy is kind of my favorite because I love Sour Patch Kids, and the sour is going to help with a dry mouth. The tartness is going to help with saliva. It's also going to, of course, provide you some quick sugar to fuel, and they taste good and gives you something to look forward to on that really long day. And especially for those of you doing the full marathon, you guys are out there for probably over 6 hours, some of you. So 7, 8, 9. I was looking at some of the race times. Some of them were like 9 hours. So at that point, you're probably going to want something salty. You're going to get sick of all these sweet chews and gels. So goldfish or chips are a good option. I saw a message popped up. They will have pickle juice at the aid stations at some of them. So that's another good option to keep in mind. And then applesauce packets are super helpful, or the fuel for fire. These ones taste good, and especially for those longer runs, the longer race, the full marathon, when it's getting over 6 hours, we do actually start to recommend some protein and some fat, like really low amounts, like 5 grams per hour of each, maybe. So these can be a good option to keep around too. This one's a sweet potato one, so baby food also works, and it's probably a little cheaper. So lots of options, but these are just some ideas. And then I did want to include, I know we're kind of up on time, we're up to question time now, but I did just want to include a couple of these extra things because I'm going to send these out. But this is just this talks about carbs during exercise and kind of like how to determine how much, if like, as you can see, if it's over 6 hours or a few hours, up to 90 grams of carb per hour. Everyone's going to have different needs. And then lastly, this is just a product overview of Skratch products. If you're interested in trying any of them, we have hydration, we have fuel, and then recovery products. So just kind of goes over those. If you have any questions on those, I'm more than happy to chat over email or whatever works best for you. But our Skratch Labs website has a ton of really good blogs that can be helpful for you. If you just search any topic, there's most likely a blog. And if there's not, feel free to email me and I'm happy to write one or get one started. And then our Instagram page at Skratch Labs also has some good information. Feel free to message me on my dietitian Instagram account. There's not much on there because I just made it recently, but hopefully soon I'll get some content out. But yeah, I'm happy to chat anytime. And if you want to work on a fueling plan, we're really well connected with a ton of sports dietitians in our network all over the country. So more than happy to send out some of those recommendations if you want to help with a fueling plan. So I will take a look at the chat box. I don't know if
Thanks, Megan.
if you wanted to answer any specific questions first on altitude or.
And real quick, for those who are registered, you have actually the email that went out today. There's a Skratch code for your first purchase, specific to the Pikes, to our races and our partnership. So check that out via email. Let's see what questions had come in. I think your infographic of the hours and carbs number breakdown, that was key. There was a couple questions about how to get that number right. Another question, and maybe Will and Anna could weigh in on this, is how does your fueling race plan change from a road race to like the Ascent? Would you go specifically just by hours on feet, or does effort and altitude come into play to change that, from a flat marathon that you're going to do in 4 hours to the Ascent you're going to do in 4 hours?
Hi everyone, Anna here. Cool to see heaps of you here, and excited to hopefully see some of you on race weekend, which would be awesome. I have done the Ascent. I haven't done the marathon there, and I have to say I haven't done a road marathon either. So maybe will be better off in answering this, but I would say for myself personally, hydrating and fueling by time, no matter what the event is. For me, it just keeps my head, a lot of it is a mental game. Like, okay, it's an hour. What do I do at an hour? I eat, I fuel, I drink, and it doesn't matter, where I'm at. The amount and what you eat may change, as Megan had said, as you're starting to get higher in the mountain and the altitude is having an effect on your stomach, not digesting that solid food, and you may be needing to go to more candy that you just shove in your mouth and chew away at while you're going, power hiking up the hill. So I would say you're in that hour of a marathon or Pikes Peak, you're going to probably be working harder on Pikes Peak. So you're probably going to need to fuel more. And I would fuel more earlier with the solid foods, and then as you get higher and later on in the race, I would go back to liquid energy.
Great.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing. I always recommend people go off time and not mileage. And exactly what Anna said. The biggest difference is that from a road race, there's so much more vertical oscillation. You're jumping up and down a lot. When we go to Pikes, you'll have some time where you're hiking, and it's not as much up and down movement. So you're able to eat more solid food and more real food than you would maybe in a road marathon, which is probably going to mostly be gels and liquid. So you have more opportunity to eat things like that's on the screen, like a rice cake or some chips, crackers, or sandwiches and things like that. So I think that's the biggest difference, but it tends to be a little bit more carb per hour on an event like this than a road marathon.
And I would say also once you get, if you're doing the marathon and you get to the top and you're ready to go back down the hill, often we get that stitch in our chest and our ribs when we're running downhill, and that can be really, really painful. And it also, you don't want to eat or drink anything at that point. So I think having fueling slowly as you're going down the hill, rather than trying to have a whole gel or a big slurp of your Skratch liquids, I would say really just suck slowly on your drink, or just put some, take the gel slowly as you're going downhill, because you have to focus so hard on your way down, and the last thing you want to be doing is trying to chew a muesli bar on the way down. Or maybe leave that for the aid station, have a little break when you get there, get your bottles filled up again, and then do the eating and carry on.
Yeah. While we're on the topic of downhill, do either of you want to weigh in on downhill training? I know that can definitely wreck a person. I've had that experience.
Absolutely. Well, you know, a lot of us are coming from flat lands where you don't get an opportunity to run down Pikes Peak. I mean, that is a really long downhill. So, you know, you do what you can, and even if that's the stairs in the city near where you live, there might be a flight of stairs that you can run up and down, or a high-rise building. It's not going to be fun, but maybe you can make it fun and doing laps up and down a building. And you can also do strength work, as Will was talking about, you know, those single leg squats, or the single leg lunges, squats, wall sits, and just incorporate that into your full day. So it doesn't have to be an hour strength session. You could do 30 seconds of a wall sit during the day, and then go and do some yoga holds for 30 seconds while you're brushing your teeth. You know, incorporate that, make that something that you do every day, that you have that deep inner strength in your legs. Because when, you know, if you are in the mountains and you're lucky that you get the mountains to train on, absolutely you need to be running, you know, the same amount of ups as downs.
Awesome. I'm going to pop over to Adam's question, and I think this is a good one for those who do have access to high altitude. When is the best time to incorporate high altitude training and exposure? How many weeks before the race?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's any, like, I haven't seen any real data of like how that works best. Like if there's a certain weeks out. I mean, I brought up bar trail a few times because I know people have had a good experience doing things like that, which tends to be, you know, 4 to 6 weeks out. You know, you don't want it to be too close. Like if you're going to do a big hike or run exposure like that, then go home and come right back. But yeah, so to answer that, I think there's really no wrong time to get something like that in and get that practice in. But I'd be curious if Anna has any thoughts on that.
I mean, I think if you're up in the mountains and you can get to altitude, then you're not doing any harm. You know, it's fantastic to get there. I would say in the week of the race, to limit the amount of time that you are going super high. But you know, there's also the other things you can do to help acclimatization if you are from low altitude, like heat training, saunas, spas. Some places even have heat workout rooms where they have treadmills or bikes that you can be in the heat. That does increase the white plasma cells, and that's then you end up getting more oxygen, and you get used to, your body adapts to working at a different climate. And so that does help. You can also go ahead and get a hypoxic machine or mask, which is obviously if you're really financially investing into this sort of event. But I think you have to just be careful in your recovery in that week beforehand, or maybe it's even 10 days, depending on how you recover, that you really take time to be at lower altitude just to get your full recovery before the race.
Anyone who's an athlete, maybe Colette even, or Megan if you're a hiker, any type of shoe suggestion that you would recommend to wear? And again, I'm going to tag on, as Will says, with planning your fuel strategy and practicing. You know, buy those shoes that you want to try out and definitely get some miles in before race day.
I've never been a trail runner, but athletes that we work with, they like, I don't know which specific models, but I love my La Sportiva hiking boots. I hike a lot, so I like those. I'm interested in trying their trail running shoes. I would love to dabble in it. And then I know Merrill makes some good trail running shoes, but you guys might have, anyone on this call might have some more expertise on that, or maybe Colette.
Yeah, I would say, you know, if you have access to one, visit your local run specialty store and try on as many shoes as you can, and see which ones you like the best, and go from there. we will selfishly plug our footwear partner, which will be announced in a few days. And we would love for you to try them, right? But ultimately, it's what works best for you as a runner. So definitely visit your run specialty stores. Ask them if they don't have a shoe, they can always typically get one. So definitely just ask around.
Yeah, I will say Hokas tend to be really popular for things like this. They make a ton of different trail models. And like Ryan said, if you can go in and try a few on, comfort is a huge thing for how long you're spending in them and something like this, and the angles you're spending in them, because you're going to be really up and down if you're doing the full. And yeah, and I'm not the biggest trail shoe guy in the world, even on trails, but this is an event that actually I would recommend it, just especially descending, so that, having the right amount of grip underneath can make a big difference here. There's so many different ones and different types, but yeah, I mean, Hoka is always like my pretty basic general recommendation. But there's a lot of great products out there.
There's a question here on scheduled group training events during the summer. So if you are local to Colorado Springs, there are several groups out there that do train. So Fleet Feet has an organized group that is meeting twice a week and will also give you a plan. The Incline Club also meets on Sundays and trains pretty regularly on or around Bar Trail, especially leading up to the race. And then we are hoping to do a course preview run, which will be mid to late August, and we'll definitely push that out. And so those are just kind of those organized groups. And there's also a few Facebook pages out there that you can post in, and people will do training runs and stuff too, so you can always look around there.
And then real quick, Steve, what about clothing to wear and bring? So we do require a hooded water resistant jacket that's going to be on your person the whole race, as well as a 12-ounce water vessel at least. It could be more, it could be multiple, but at least one 12-ounce bottle. And then otherwise for clothing, again, practice while you're training. Anything lightweight, definitely. The packs are great because you could bring a hat, you could bring gloves. The weather, is unexpected on a 14,000 foot mountain. The weather can change and it can get colder at the top. So definitely that jacket, hat, or a buff, and gloves are a lot of people really like. Most of the time you can start in your shorts and a t-shirt, or even have your jacket on at the start line. But for the most part, shorts seems to be the top running apparel.
Jordan, can I go through a couple of these questions that were earlier?
Mm-hmm.
There's one that said, asked about like hill workouts for people who don't have any hills. If they're on a treadmill, should they be zone 2 hills or like more of like a threshold type? I would say you can definitely do both. Like there's some people who will either do a hike or their easy run, but have it at a pretty decent incline. But you could also, like if, on a day that you normally would have done like flat intervals, like mile repeats or, something like 1K or 3-minute repeats, you can turn that effort into a hill repeat as well on the treadmill, moving that incline up and finding the mix of incline and speed that would get you that same effort, 7, 8 out of 10. That's pretty hard. So you can definitely do both. But like we kind of talked about, finding that balance, it doesn't need to be that necessarily every day. But having a mix of both of those, I think, would be super helpful. And then there was one more about how to prioritize like total training volume between like running mileage, strength, getting vert, like what's the best use of all of that. And there's a lot of things, a lot of ways to go about that. I would say to follow your experience and motivation. I've coached a lot of different athletes some who have a lot of strength background and they love being in the gym, and that really motivates them. And so we'll lean into that, and we might go to the gym 4 days a week. And there's some who don't really love strength work, and they can run a lot and they do have access to trails. So we might only do 1, maybe 2 strength days, and we'll lean into the running side. So I would focus on what you're good at and your motivation and what's going to help you get the most out of your week and what will make you go out, work out the most, and lean into that and kind of gear that towards Pikes, if that makes sense. So follow your motivation there would be my question, answer to that. Yeah. And then there was the last one I was talking about. Is there any value in running really like rocky, rooty single track trails? And so for every trail race, I always say trying to make especially your long runs, but as many runs as possible is similar to the race course as possible, so similar type of trails. And I don't think are there any single track? Like, I don't think there's any technical single track on course.
I mean, that's all kind of relative, right? But it's
Very
not
true.
it's not insanely technical, right? And so we don't call it the most technical course, but it is rocky in some parts. It is a trail, right? So that's not going to hurt. Do you need to train on that every day? No, right? And so I would say if you can get that in once a week or a little bit here and there, it's all going to help.
Awesome. Well, before we wrap up, I want Anna to give us, Anna's run it twice, the Ascent, finished in the top 3 female. So as a first timer, what do you wish you would have known?
I think the first time I ran it, I was actually shocked at how it just kept on going. I couldn't believe it. I was like, how am I not near the top yet? And so I think the mental sort of preparation for me, because I had run a little bit down the bottom and it's like nice, lovely, buttery trails. And you think, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to be up there before you know it. And I just couldn't believe how it just took so long. And I think mentally I had to really prepare that the start of it, while it is like a nice trail, it is up and it keeps going up and it doesn't stop going up and it just keeps going up until you get to the very, very, very top. I did the Ascent, so I didn't have to turn around and come back down, which is a whole other kettle of fish. But I think just the obviously the fitness to be able to run uphill for a long time, run or power hike. And when I say power hike, it's a really specific thing that you have to practice doing. You have to practice your power hiking because it's at this grade where you're kind of like, I should run, but it's too hard to run. And so I'm going to walk, but it's kind of too, I don't know, it's kind of an in-betweeny. So you really have to practice power hiking. You're not just going for a stroll. You are power hiking. You got to hike like you mean it. And I think just knowing that you're just going to have to keep on going and going and going until you can smell the Dunkin' Donuts at the top, when you're actually at the top. I think fueling early is very important because as you get higher, you're tired. You don't want to eat. Potentially there's snow up there as there has been now. And your hands might be cold. You might not be able to get your snacks out. So do things early. Get your head in a space where you're like, okay, I'm eating, I'm fueling early, I'm running, I'm hiking, I'm out here for this full day that it's going to take me to the top. Don't have too many expectations on yourself and give yourself the grace that this is going to be hard.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we are slightly over an hour, so I think we'll wrap it up, but appreciate all the participation, the questions. We will be sure to post all these resources on our website, our Facebook page, and then most likely an email to the registered runners. So you'll have contacts and like some of those forms Will had and those great infographics Megan had to calculate your carb needs. So thank you, everyone. Looking forward to seeing you in September, if not before.
And one big thing as you guys leave, just understand that the support does not stop tonight. Sundog and Skratch, they're here for you guys. We are here for you guys. So don't feel like you can't reach out. Please ask us questions. Please email us. Please call us if you need to, right? And so we want you to feel supported. We want you to be excited about coming on race day and finishing the race and having a great experience.
And Dominic, if you want to get off mute, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I can stay and answer any questions too. So
Perfect. Well, I think Dominic has possibly a question. His hand is up.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, there was another hand. Maybe it went away. Feel free to get off mute if you have a specific question you're ready to give our host. All right. Well, I think I'm just going to end it all. But again, yes, email us with questions, get engaged with us on social, and we'll be sure everyone has contacts and access to these awesome experts. So thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Mm.